Right. The book for January is Shock. I know. Another spy book. It is The Seventh Floor by David McCloskey, who is ex-CIA analyst, now a writer of spy fiction, who writes these spy thrillers, who has been, big claim I know, been described as America's answer to John le Carre, which is a big claim, but something I'm not opposed to, given his track record of books, which starts with Damascus Station, which is quite the more famous one, and runs all the way up to The Seventh Floor, which is the book I'm discussing today, and his most recent one that comes out this month, January. So yeah, the plot centers around Sam and Artemis, two ex-CIA analysts who've been in his books before, but you don't need to read the other books to know these people. You can start it from scratch, meet them here, and you'll still love them. So the two people in the CIA central office. They both work around or in the Russia house, which is like the sort of Russian unit within the CIA. And the story sort of starts with Sam. His mission, which he's on in Singapore, interestingly enough, goes horribly wrong, and he ends up captured and tortured by Russian agents. Artemis, who is his supervisor and kind of a close friend, maybe mentor figure, helps to seek his release, and when he eventually is, helps him reintegrate into the agency after that health scare. However, things start to go wrong for her pretty quickly. There's a return of her two old friends to the agency, Finn Gosford and Deborah Sweets. So the two friends who, along with some other friends that I'll mention later, served with her in Afghanistan at the beginning of their career about 2 decades ago. So, yeah. Finn Gosford, one of those friends, arrives as the new director of CIA, but he's going to out for Artemis. Not a fan. Not a fan at all. So, Artemis ends up mixing up, failing, making a mistake that allows Gosford, ex-friend, sort of friend, you work out pretty quick that they're not really friends anymore. That mistake that she makes allows him to give a reason to kick her out of the agency. So she's out now. As the story is really kicking into high gear, she's out, and Sam is basically on medical leave, which is quite interesting. The two characters they're not in the picture. But anyway, what we work out pretty quick, as Artemis and Sam are looking back on the events, they realise that Sam was set up, because there's no way that the operation could have gone wrong without a leak, right? They realise other agents have been turning up dead, disappeared, not as effective, which means there's a serious leak, a leak at the very top. And this is where the title comes in. The top of CIA is the 7th floor, so that's where Finn Gosford and Deborah Sweets, her old friends, and new director work. 7th floor is like C-suite for CIA officers, the top level. And so they work out the leak has to come from there, like all the way at the top. So, they have to investigate all of Artemis's old friends, because they are the key characters at the centre of the 7th floor. So, I've already mentioned Finn Gosford. He served in Afghanistan with them. He left CIA to the disdain of other people in order to go become a lobbyist. That gives him the political connections he needs in order to become director. But it also earns him the distrust of all the career officers who think he left the agency just to go make money and then return as our boss. His sidekick is Deborah Sweets. Even more of an enemy of Artemis now. Served with in Afghanistan with her again, but we learn after a pretty bad prank by Artemis, she now hates Artemis. So both of those people not fans of her. Then there are some closer friends who are still at the top. There's Theo, there's Mac, and then there's Gus. And I'm going to make sure I get their names right so that I don't confuse you. So, First off, there is Gus. He's a married officer. He worked out of Moscow like Artemis. So, suspicious maybe. But he seems to have one of the few happy marriages, good personal lives at CIA, except for one flaw. He's got a son who is in rehab, in and out of rehab constantly, and that's bleeding their finances dry. So inevitably, money suspicions, that places some suspicion on him. Then you've got Theo. Theo is different, pretty much the opposite. He is a trust fund kid, lots of money, less successful marriage, and a heavy drinker. Gus, who I mentioned a minute ago, Mormon, very anti-drinking, not wealthy. Theo, heavy drinker, wealthy, opposite. They're both friends. Right? And then there's Mac, which is another one of their friends who served in Afghanistan with them again, and is, you could say, a middle ground between the two characters. Okay, so Theo, Mac, Gus, trio of male officers. Sweets and Gosford, that's Finn Sweets and Deborah Gosford. Those are the two at the top. Trio duo, and then our duo, Artemis and Sam. And these are the key characters that you need to know for the story. And then all of these people are facing off against a Russian counterpart named Rem Zomov, who is a really old school director of Russian intelligence, who works on the illegal program, which is Russians disguised as Americans for their whole lives in the US. Sabotage, assassination, anything they need to do for the Russian state under deep cover. He's in charge of that. Pretty formidable opponent. And his character is set up like that, the classic spy stuff. He plays chess, lives alone with his wife, doesn't do anything outside of work. He is that, that stereotype. So these are the people you need to know. And the story is progressing with Artemis out of the agency, becoming suspicious. So she's contacting other people, including Sam, who ends up helping her investigate who the leak could possibly be. They're going around, talking to each of her friends, trying to work out what could possibly be happening. Then, the story really picks up. So I'm trying not to spoil too much, but I'll give you some of the big events. In the course of their investigation, Zomov, that's the Russian, sends two illegals to kill Artemis in her trailer where she's living, suggesting she's onto something. They fail, and one of the illegals dies in the process. And after that, Sam and Artemis pick up their efforts. They really pick it up. I won't give you all the details because that's the fun of the book, but eventually they narrow it down to a few suspects. Now, finally, they use bait, or what sometimes called a barrier meal. So they give information that they know is going to be passed back to the Russians to work out who the mole is, or more aptly in this case, to flush him out. And so it works. They realize the mole is going to contact the Russians. They stake out a farmhouse where they know the mole is going to be, meeting with his Russian handler. And as they're staking it out, Artemis realizes it's Mac, who's her closest friend, and importantly, I didn't mention this earlier, but this is a good fact, now that you know he's the traitor, the one who saved her life. Okay, so, we're about 2/3 through the story. We're in France. They know who the traitor is, but the Russians are onto them. Shootout emerges. The fight begins. Artemis and Sam flee, and they make it back to the US safely. Okay, so, Artemis and Sam have returned. They have no evidence, but they know who the traitor is. Using some sneaky logic, they convince her other friends that it is Mac after all. But, in a pretty brutal, harsh reality that's quite accurate to real spycraft. They can't convict him, they can't do anything to him, but basically force him to retire. And so the story sort of ends there. He gets a full goodbye ceremony. It's a little awkward, but it's a full ceremony for him. as any normal CIA officer would get. And you could end the book thinking, oh, this was a good book, but he gets away. And everyone's okay, I guess. But the story continues for 1 or 2 more chapters. Now this is a really big spoiler, so turn off if you want to read the book. Bigger spoiler than Mac being the traitor. In the last few chapters, Sam is alone, living out of his car. We meet him in a sort of American diner. He's having food, his normal chatty, happy self, and he goes home to his car with the waitress at the diner, who he's just met. It's only as he's in the car with her that you realise this is the other illegal. Remember, there were 2, and 1 is left, and this is her, deep cover, as the waitress. And she kills Sam, the character of this book, character of previous books, and she brutally kills him in the car, and Artemis finds his body. It's a pretty brutal twist. It's a really good twist, and it's what makes this book so good, in my opinion, because he's willing to kill off such a good character. Okay, now let's move on to some context, because that's just a quick rundown of the plot. The context is, as I've said, this is people have described him as David McCloskey, the author, as America's answer to John le Carre. Now, why is that, right? Well, this structure is just like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, you may have seen the film or even read the book. It's a classic John le Carre one, where there's a group of friends at the very top of MI6, and one of them is the traitor. And this character has got to go through and work out who's the traitor. And they've got to distinguish between these personal relationships, the deep loyalties, human emotions, and real spycraft. And this kind of follows that structure because it's the 7th floor, these people are all friends, and it's that same sort of chess game of people you know and who's the traitor. It's that style. But it's not just a copy, it's very different. It's not only the American counterpart. The characters are fundamentally different. There's 2 protagonists in Sam and Artemis instead of 1. And yeah, it's well worth a read, even if you read Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, especially if you've read it. There's also some historical context outside of just the context for the writing style. And that is betrayal, right? CIA, it's not as bad as MI6 or even FBI for traitors, but there are some high-profile ones, like Aldrich Ames, who was a CIA counterintelligence officer who was secretly spying for the Soviet Union right up until he was caught in 1994. Funnily enough, he's still alive, and he's still serving a life sentence for that act of treason. So this is a real thing. It happens. And as we said, often they get away, or they can end up in jail. So there's real context for this. And then we go back to the writing. Now that you know the context and the book context, the style is quite good, I have to say. I think I enjoy the Le Carre slow books. They're great, they're masterpieces, but this is easier to read. You know, that's not to devalue it as if it's like cheap writing, but it's fast, it's easy to read, it's easy to digest. Even if you're not interested in spies, it's just a good action story, good psychological story. It keeps the pace going. The 2 protagonists keep things interesting, and the final twist at the end can really shock you. So, hopefully, don't spoil it for yourself. There's loads of good action. The psychological element is good, the surprises are good, and most importantly, David McCloskey really creates good characters, because that's what the story is all about, right? It's about this group of friends on the 7th floor, and all of the characters, I've only briefly described them here, but all of the characters are really fleshed out. They will have individual traits, individual weaknesses, things that make you think they could be the traitor, but also things that redeem them. So I mentioned Finn, right? He has bad qualities, right? He's a director who, political connections, weird, also shot himself in the foot. to get a medal, yeah, right? But he believes Artemis in the end and helps her, you know? Or Sweets, Deborah Sweets, his friend. She hates Artemis, plays pranks on Artemis, puts laxatives in Artemis's cupcakes. Not a joke, that happens. But she believes her in the end and helps her. So what I'm trying to say is the personal relationships between the characters are what makes this book. It's what makes it great, and that's what makes the writing great, because he's created these characters that work. You're attached to them, you feel for them, and you really care which one is the traitor. And that's pretty much all the reasons why I would give this book a really high review. If I had to go on the spot, like 8.5. I think it is really good. It's probably the best spy thriller I've read. It's definitely historically accurate. He's an ex-CIA analyst, so it's good on internal CIA stuff. The writing style is good. It's a good ode to Le Carre, sort of, an ode to that genre. It keeps in one genre. So I think genuinely an 8.5, and I absolutely would recommend. Yeah, go read it.